Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Nesavar and today I'm covering how to paint anime eyes. The method I'm going to be covering is how to paint eyes not just in 2D but in 3D. I'll be demoing it done in 3D, but the same methodology can be done also in 2D programs like Photoshop and others. The program to demo this will be Zbrush, and the brushes I'll be using, I don't know where to say that, is the standard, and standard brush. After the demo, I'll be going over what I did and why throughout the entire process of it. What I got on screen right now is eyes I've done in the past, ranging from different types of styles, shapes, and colors. So let's go ahead and get straight to the demo. What I got here is a scene I've got set up. It's nothing too crazy, it's just a basic anime styled head and a bit of hair to kind of frame the elements of the eyes. So let's go ahead and get started on this demo. I'm going to be doing a quick version of how I make eyes, and then later on I can go on and explain what I did and why I did the things that I did. So first off, I'm going to get started on the base layer. Oh, let's get a simple color for that. So then we'll get started on the pupil next. Yeah. Sure. And then add a bit of shadow. A little bit of red. Back in the whites. Add a little bit more. Darker than that. Then we can go ahead and bring a little bit of brightness. A little bit brighter, a little bit more saturation. Slightly shift that hue. Much darker lower portion of the pupil. Even darker. Add a contour. A couple of stylized markings here. Boost the saturation. And there you have it. Pretty quickly done. Nothing too crazy. Pretty fast. We can get more detail and kind of polish it up a bit more along the way, but here's just a little bit of a rundown on what's going to be covered today. So now let's hop into what I did and why I did the things I did to this eye. So let's go over the first step I always do, which is the base color. Base color is most important because it kind of lays down the main color you're going to aim for, and at the same time the direction of the eye. So let me go ahead and paint a brand new base color right here. Let's use a blue again. I'm gonna do a mid-tone and then a little bit dark because we're gonna bring back a bit of brightness later on. So I have symmetry on right now, but let's paint in this eye. And we get to that. Sometimes your eye will be looking in a different direction, so you can have symmetry off and you can paint in here and in here. And that's why the base color is most important, because you get to see it as the main big shape. The big shape, so you can see exactly what direction the eye is looking and if it's looking in the right direction or not. Because you can be painting and going crazy in detail and not notice that the eye is looking in two different directions. So you don't want to do that. There are three main things I like to look for when it comes to painting an eye, and I'll be going over each of those things in this video. So I've got the eye back looking forward, and I'm going to be going over the first of the three things I like to look out for when painting eyes, which is the bottom of the iris. One of the things I always look out for is making sure the bottom of the iris is in a decent position. At the end of the day, when you're painting an eye, the main thing you're looking out for is if it's meeting the emotion you're going for. So it could be surprised, sad, angry, or for this video's purpose, relaxed. For a relaxed eye, you want to make sure the bottom of the iris touches the bottom eyelid. So if we go back to our references, one thing that you'll notice is the bottom of the iris is always barely touching the bottom of the eyelid. Sometimes it'll slightly overlap, very slightly, and sometimes it'll slightly go up. It depends on where the eye is looking, right? But since she's looking slightly up, there is a bit of a gap. But for the most part, when the character is looking forward, they're going to be barely touching the bottom eyelid. So as you can see here, we got the touching pretty close to the bottom eyelid. The next thing I'm going to do is then add a pupil, which then comes to the second of the three things I look out for, which is the position of the pupil. For the positioning of the pupil, the thing I like to look out for is the top of the pupil touching the top eyelid. Very similar to the bottom iris touching the bottom eyelid, but for this, pupil touching the top eyelid. If you look at these images that I showed earlier and you stare just at the pupil, you'll notice very commonly when the eye is at a relaxed state, the top of the pupil touches right next to the upper eyelid. So literally, see, same thing here, upper eyelid. She's looking slightly up, so it overlaps a little bit, but that's generally what you want to think of. Same thing here, pupil touching the upper eyelid. Same thing here, pupil touching the upper eyelid. Highlights in the way, ruining the video. I'm gonna go ahead and choose a color for this pupil. You don't want it to be too dark. You don't want it to be too light. A little bit, like slightly above that. And you can choose to have more saturation, less saturation, something to explore. So let's get this here. Notice I'm going to paint this and have it touch right on the top eyelid. Reason being on why I didn't make it pitch black dark is later on I like to go in and add a little bit of a dark outline on the bottom of the eye. Kind of give a nice little contour of it. So after I do this, the next step I do, which is the third of the last things I look out for, which is adding a shadow. So adding a shadow for the iris or the white of the eyes, I like to use two different hues, two different values of colors. So for the iris, I like to use just a slightly darker version, probably explore a little bit of a slight hue shift in one direction for that section. And then for the whites of the eyes, I like to use more of a red, slightly darker, not pink, but more of a red on that area. So let's go ahead and show that really quick. I'm gonna get a dark value, and then I'll slightly adjust the hue if you want. Big brush. Don't be afraid to use a big brush. Some people like to use very small brush and kind of slowly paint details in. I like to use really big brush, saving some time. Let's go ahead and paint that. That here. And that here. And we get that. So it's not completely done yet. We still have to do the whites of the eyes. So like I was saying earlier, I like to use a bit more of a red in this area. It doesn't have to be too dark, but it doesn't have to be necessarily a pink. And the reason being is, when you think of somebody's eyes, you see veins, and the eyes get pink sometimes too, right? But you don't want to do too much tertiary details when it comes to these kind of stylized characters. So I kind of imagine it kind of blurred. And what value or color is that? So let's go ahead and get that really quick. Let's get a red, a little bit dark, something like that. And I'll paint the outside edges. Get that really quick, paint the top. So we're getting a bit more of a mid-tone value in this eye now. You can always go back in, paint back whites if you feel like it's doing a bit too much. And now I'm going to be looking at the contour of the eye. So I'm going to paint that same value back. I do it more on the edges. Something like so. And then I'm going to slightly darken it. Do the same thing, but mainly on the edges. Same on the bottom. Add a nice little AL look to it. And then if you want, once again, go back with whites and paint away if you've done way too much. You have a little bit of it bleeding over here, but it's not a problem. We can go back in with that color, darker, paint back in that shadow. Yeah. And those are the main three elements I think of when it comes to making a relaxed eye. So notice how right now, it does look relaxed, but it does lack details, and there's little things we can do to kind of push this further. So the first thing I'm going to do in terms of the stylization is the outline of the iris, okay? So let's get a dark value here. Let's paint the outline of the iris. Now, that's totally up to you if you want to explore more of a stylization of it being something totally different in hue. You know, I can go into this and choose a different color if I want it. Let's straight up go with, I don't know, let's go like a pink and try that. You know, that's going to add even more stylization. So that's what I'm talking about, is no matter what you do in this entire process, you can always explore different colors, different hues, different tones, and it'll dramatically change how the eye output is going to be. And I think it's something that's I highly recommend you do during the entire process. Let's go ahead and add a dark color instead. That, this here, add this here, something like, oops, something like this. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is then add a brighter lower iris. So what I like to do is grab that same color and then slightly shift it in a direction in the hue, and then choose something more saturated and brighter, usually in the mid-tone, and then I'll go and work my way up to a brighter tone. So we'll start with the mid-tone for now. Big brush, and soften this specific bottom area. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab a slightly less saturated but then brighter version of that and paint the center. So what I'm thinking about when it comes to me painting that brighter and more saturated area on the bottom of the iris is essentially a natural light source that's coming from above, lighting that bottom iris. So what I got here is a eyeball 3D model that I will use as an example. And you'll notice as I move the camera around, there's a highlight here that will then shift back and forth as I move the camera. And that's essentially what I'm painting in that detail. It's literally this highlight as a brighter, more saturated section of that lower iris. The next thing I'm going to do is then paint a brighter portion of the pupil. So I'm going to paint same thing. Let's get a little hue shift, more saturation, and then I will paint with a small brush, very right down here. So let me explain why I paint that little highlight right below the pupil. So back to this 3D model I got earlier. I got a more simplified, detailed version. Removed all the small tertiary details that were in the iris area. And if you look at this, there's essentially this little bevel right here, and look at the wireframe, it goes into the pupil. And if you look at that in certain angles, like you see right here, there's a highlight that then travels slowly across the entire bevel, literally along this entire rim. That's essentially what I'm painting here, right here, on that lower portion right below the pupil. And lastly, I'm going to add some small little tertiary lines, imitating the details you usually see in eyes. Maybe we get a brighter color. And then we can go ahead and add some stylized reflections. So this is something I see very often in anime eyes, people that do fan art and such online. They like to do a specific shape that kind of imitates a light source or reflection on the eyes, but they really boost the colors of it. So I'm going to do something like triangle sort, a blue, maybe I'll go to a yellow, paint that up here, maybe it's just a line and not a similar shape to that, and then perhaps we go to a pink and then we painted this area. Otherwise, if you did something where you painted whites instead, specifically just whites, and you did some usual eye reflections like this and this, kind of imitating a window, and then perhaps a small flare of sort, it starts to look more like a realistic eye, which is not bad. You know, this depends on the style you're trying to go for, but for creating a bit more stylization, you could do something like adding colored shapes on the eyes as imitating reflections or light sources. And that's essentially how I paint eyes. I do the same thing every single time for 2D and or 3D characters. But yeah, that workflow is literally the same every time. Sometimes I make some subtle changes, sometimes I don't have the edge outline, sometimes I don't have a pupil. It depends what I'm exploring, it depends what I think looks better at the time or not. I've got a clean scene again, and now I'm going to demo me creating an eyeball from scratch once again. That's another demo of me painting another pair of anime or stylized eyes. If you still have some questions, or you got an idea on something you want to see in the future videos, feel free to leave a comment below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.